The chopper's blades cut through the thick, ash-filled air as Sergeant Ryan Cole checked his gear. Sweat dripped down the side of his face, but it wasn't from the heat, it was the nerves. Missions like this never went as planned. ETA 2 minutes, the pilot called over the comms. Cole adjusted his rifle strap and glanced at his squad: Hendricks, the demolitions expert, silent as ever; Alvarez, their medic, tightening his gloves; and Lieutenant Briggs, their by-the-book leader, double-checking the extraction plan. The objective was simple: find Dr. Elias Wren and get him out. The scientist had been researching a cure before his lab was overrun. Command believed he was still alive, holed up somewhere in the facility below. The helicopter hovered over the ruined research center, its rooftop littered with abandoned supply crates and the twisted bodies of failed evacuees. The team fast roped down, weapons ready. Cole hit the ground last, eyes scanning the darkened corridors ahead. The facility had once been pristine, but now the walls were smeared with blood, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows. The air was thick with decay. "Move in pairs," Briggs ordered. "We find Wren and get out. No heroics." Cole and Hendricks took point, creeping through the hallway. The silence was deceptive, nothing was ever really quiet in a place like this. A distant snarl. A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. "Contact," Cole whispered, raising his rifle. A figure shambled into view, skin mottled and peeling, its jaw hanging unnaturally loose. A former scientist, maybe. Cole squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack echoed as the bullet found its mark, dropping the undead where it stood. More movement. Then the walls seemed to come alive. From doors and vents, the infected spilled out in a grotesque wave. The team opened fire, but the creatures kept coming. Clawed hands reached. Snapping jaws lunged. Cole fought through them, every bullet counted. Then, pain. A flash of white-hot agony as teeth sank into his forearm. He drove his combat knife into the creature's skull, prying it off him, but the damage was done. His breath caught. "No, no, no! Fall back!" Briggs yelled. They pushed forward, hacking their way through until they reached the reinforced lab doors. Hendricks planted a charge, blowing the lock. Inside was worse than outside. Blood everywhere. A desperate scrawl across the wall read, "They got him. Get the notes. Run." Dr. Wren was dead. But his research, his cure, was here. Alvarez grabbed the files. "Got it. We need to move." Cole's vision swam. A cold sweat ran down his spine. His arm burned. He flexed his fingers, but the wound throbbed like it was alive. "Not now. Keep moving." They reached the rooftop just as the helicopter swung back around. The infected poured onto the rooftop, climbing over one another in a frenzy. "Covering fire." Cole bellowed, unloading his last magazine into the swarm. The team scrambled aboard, Alvarez nearly getting dragged off before Hendricks pulled him in. As the helicopter lifted off, Cole collapsed against the wall. His sleeve was already soaked with blood. His fingers trembled. No one had noticed. Not yet. He exhaled slowly. He had a choice to make. Tell them now, and risk getting shot. Or stay quiet. Buy himself time. Maybe enough time to finish the mission before he turned. Maybe. The helicopter cut through the night sky, its rotors thundering against the howling wind. Inside the cramped cabin, Sergeant Ryan Cole kept his arm tucked close, his mind racing. The bite pulsed like a slow-burning ember beneath his sleeve. No one had noticed. Not yet. Alvarez clutched the blood-stained research notes, flipping through the pages under the dim red cabin lights. "If this is legit," he muttered, "we might actually have a shot at reversing the infection." Briggs nodded. "Then we secure it at Outpost Echo. Command's already prepping a lab for analysis. No detours, no risks." Cole clenched his jaw. No detours. That meant no medical stops. No last-minute attempts to save himself. He flexed his fingers, watching how they twitched slightly. The infection was moving fast. Faster than it should. He needed to hold on. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. Got a problem, LT fuel leak. We're not making it to Echo. Briggs cursed. Options? Closest fallback is Ridgeway. Used to be a military base. Could still have supplies. Do it. Cole swallowed hard. Ridgeway. He'd heard stories. The last team sent there never came back. As the helicopter descended, the ground below came into focus. The base, once a proud stronghold, was now a ghost town. The main gates had been crushed inward, vehicles lay overturned, and the distant shapes of the undead wandered aimlessly. The chopper touched down. Briggs, Hendricks, and Alvarez moved quickly, securing the perimeter. Cole followed, every step a battle against the fever building inside him. His skin prickled. His breath felt too slow, too heavy. You good, Cole? Hendricks asked. Cole forced a smirk. Just tired of this nightmare. They pushed forward, weapons ready. The entrance to the base was a twisted mess of barricades and dried blood. Signs of a last stand. Stay sharp, Briggs muttered. The team moved through the ruined corridors, clearing room after room. The stench of rot clung to everything. Then they heard it. A guttural growl. Cole barely had time to react before something massive lunged from the darkness. It wasn't like the others. This one was bigger, its body swollen, its muscles unnaturally thick. The thing slammed into Hendricks, sending him crashing into the wall. Contact. Briggs fired, the bullets tearing into its flesh, but the creature barely flinched. Cole raised his rifle, but his vision blurred. A sudden dizziness overtook him, and his fingers faltered on the trigger. The infected brute turned its soulless eyes toward him. Then it charged. A split second too late, Cole dodged. The creature's clawed hand raked across his chest, throwing him backward. Pain flared, but it was dull compared to the fire already raging in his veins. Alvarez emptied his magazine, finally bringing the thing down. It fell with a wet, gurgling snarl. Hendricks groaned, clutching his ribs. We need to move. Briggs nodded. Grab what we can and get the hell out. They scavenged quickly, finding only a few cans of fuel and scattered medical supplies. Cole found something else, a mirror. He hesitated before looking at his reflection. His pupils were dilated. His veins darkened. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his skin had a sickly pallor. It was happening. He clenched his fists, his breath shallow. Not yet. Not yet. He turned away before anyone could see. As they exited, a distant roar echoed through the ruins. More were coming. The mission was still on. He just had to survive long enough to complete it. Even if he wasn't fully human by the time he did. The roar in the distance grew louder. More of them were coming. Sergeant Ryan Cole steadied his breathing, forcing his body to move despite the infection clawing at his insides. Every step felt heavier, every breath more labored. The others didn't notice, yet. Briggs led them toward the base's motor pool, where a few rusted Humvees sat abandoned. We hotwire one of these, we're out of here in 10. Make it 5, Hendricks grunted, still favoring his ribs. Alvarez kept his rifle up, eyes scanning the darkened corridors behind them. They're closing in. Cole tightened his grip on his own weapon. His fingers trembled slightly. He clenched his fist to stop the shaking. They reached the nearest Humvee, Briggs yanking open the door while Hendricks got to work on the ignition wires. Then the screaming started. Not human. Something else. Cole turned in time to see the first infected burst from a nearby hangar, its body contorted and fast, far too fast. Runners. Alvarez shouted. The creatures moved with inhuman speed, sprinting toward them on all fours before launching themselves forward like rabid animals. Briggs fired first, dropping one midair. Cole snapped his rifle up, trying to focus, but his vision flickered. His arms felt sluggish. One of the runners tackled Alvarez, slamming him into the side of the Humvee. He screamed as teeth tore into his shoulder. Cole moved on instinct. He drew his knife and drove it into the runner's skull, twisting hard before shoving the thing off Alvarez. But the damage was done. Alvarez collapsed, clutching the wound, eyes wide with terror. I'm hit. Hendricks swore as the Humvee roared to life. Get in now. Briggs grabbed Alvarez and shoved him into the back while Cole scrambled in after him. The infected swarmed the vehicle just as Hendricks slammed his foot on the gas. The Humvee tore through the ruined base, mowing down anything in its path. The undead slammed their fists against the windows, snarling as they clung to the sides. Briggs fired through the open door, dropping them one by one. Cole, cover the rear. Cole turned, gripping his rifle, but then... pain. A white-hot surge of agony flooded his skull, and suddenly, he couldn't hear the gunfire, couldn't focus. His vision flickered between the present and something else, something wrong. For a brief second, he felt the hunger. His gaze snapped to Alvarez. The man was sweating, his breath ragged. Wounded. Bleeding. And Cole could smell it. His heartbeat thundered. A new instinct, something primal, something monstrous, surged inside him. No. No. He clenched his jaw so hard his teeth hurt. Forced himself to turn away. The moment passed, but it left him shaken. Briggs was still focused on the road ahead. Hendricks kept the pedal down. No one had noticed Cole's hesitation. Yet. Alvarez groaned. I don't want to turn, he muttered. I don't want to turn, man. Briggs kept his eyes forward. We'll deal with it at Echo. Cole exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure if Alvarez would make it. But the real question was, would he? Because now, for the first time, Cole wasn't sure if he was still fighting against the infection. Or if it was already winning. The Humvee barreled down the broken highway, its tires kicking up dust and debris. The undead still clung to the vehicle, their clawed hands scraping against the reinforced frame, their guttural moans filling the air. Briggs swerved violently, slamming one of the creatures into a rusted guardrail, sending it tumbling into the darkness. Hendricks leaned out the passenger side, unloading his pistol into another that had latched onto the roof. It fell away, shrieking. In the back, Sergeant Ryan Cole pressed a hand to his temple, his vision swimming. Every pulse of blood through his veins felt unnatural, wrong. The infection was spreading. Fast. Across from him, Alvarez was fading. He clutched his bitten shoulder, his breathing shallow, sweat soaking his collar. I'm cold, he mumbled. I can't feel my hands. Cole could hear his heart beating. No, not his own. Alvarez's. Slow. Weak. The hunger returned. It coiled inside him like a living thing, urging him to act, to feed. His fingers twitched. His mouth went dry. Fight it. He squeezed his eyes shut. He was still in control. He had to be. Briggs' voice snapped through the tension. Echo's still 30 clicks out. We need to stop, check the fuel levels. Hendricks shot him a look. Are you crazy? We stop, we die. We run dry, we die anyway. The lieutenant pulled the Humvee into the ruins of a gas station, its old-world neon sign flickering dimly. The place had been abandoned for months, looted, burned, forgotten. Briggs and Hendricks jumped out, weapons raised, sweeping the area. Cole hesitated. He should help. He should be out there, covering their six. But Alvarez was still in the back. Still bleeding. Still dying. Cole's head throbbed, his body burning from the inside out. He clenched his fists so hard his nails dug into his palms. Don't look at him. But he did. Alvarez's breathing was ragged now. His eyes fluttered. The fever had him in its grip. And then, his lips moved. Cole leaned closer, expecting last words. But what came out wasn't human. A snarl. Low. Involuntary. Cole's stomach turned. Alvarez was turning. And so was he. His own body betrayed him before he even realized it. His breathing had changed, slowed to match Alvarez's. His fingers twitched in time with Alvarez's spasms. He could feel the infection reaching out, trying to connect them. Then, Alvarez's hand moved. Not weakly. Not like a dying man. His fingers curled unnaturally, muscles tightening, his back arching. And then his eyes snapped open. Pure, glassy black. Cole reacted on instinct. He drew his knife and slammed it into Alvarez's skull. The body convulsed, once, twice, before slumping against the Humvee's floor. Silence. Cole stayed frozen, his own breath coming in shallow gasps. He looked down at the knife still in his grip, the blood still wet on his hands. He had killed Alvarez. And not just because it was mercy. Because for a second, just a second, he hadn't been sure which one of them was the monster anymore. Cole! Briggs' voice snapped him back. Cole turned to see the lieutenant staring at him from outside the Humvee. Briggs' eyes flicked down to the body. Then to the blood on Cole's hands. Cole's heart pounded. Did he know? Did he see what was happening to him? Briggs' jaw tightened. We need to move. Cole nodded stiffly and climbed out. The infection was winning. And now, Briggs was watching him. The sky had darkened into a deep, oppressive shade of black as the Humvee rumbled forward. The distant howl of the undead echoed through the cracked windows, but the team was silent. Ryan Cole's heart pounded with every beat, a constant reminder of the infection ravaging his body. He could feel it, like a fire spreading through his veins, consuming his humanity piece by piece. It was only a matter of time before his body fully gave in. He just didn't know how much longer he could hold on. Briggs and Hendricks exchanged tense glances as they drove, the weight of the situation hanging over them like a storm. Alvarez was dead. His body, still slumped in the back of the vehicle, was the first casualty of the night. Cole had seen it, the subtle shift in Alvarez's eyes as he began to turn. It had been mercy. He didn't regret it. But the cold truth lingered, it was only a matter of time before one of them, him, became the next. Outpost Echo was close now. Just a few more miles. But Cole knew they wouldn't make it if they didn't keep moving. The infected were swarming, multiplying by the hour. They had to be prepared for what lay ahead. We need to clear the perimeter before we land, Briggs muttered, his eyes scanning the horizon. We don't know what's waiting for us out there. The Humvee jolted as Hendricks hit a pothole, nearly throwing them off course. Cole gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. His hand tightened around his rifle. He couldn't afford to slip. Not yet. The road ahead narrowed, the remains of a burned-out village flanking their path. The smell of death lingered, the acrid stench of rotting flesh reaching their nostrils. We'll stop here, Briggs said, signaling Hendricks to pull over. Stay sharp. Cole climbed out first, his boots crunching against the broken asphalt. The air felt heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He scanned the area, his eyes darting to the buildings, the alleyways. Every shadow could hide a threat. We split up, Briggs ordered, his voice low. Hendricks, Cole, left flank. Alvarez's body stays with us, in case we need to lure them. The mention of Alvarez hit Cole like a punch to the gut, but he shoved it down. There was no time to mourn now. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. The wind howled through the empty streets, pushing their breath out in clouds of vapor. Cole could feel his limbs growing heavier with every step. The infection was nearing its peak. He had to fight the urge to reach for his sidearm, to end it himself before the transformation took over completely. But that wasn't an option. Not now. Not when they were so close. A blood-curdling screech shattered the silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling feet. They were here. Cole's heart thudded in his chest, adrenaline pumping through his veins. A flood of infected poured out of the buildings ahead, their eyes empty and ravenous. The swarm was relentless, closing in on them like a tide. "Move!" Briggs shouted. Hendricks and Cole opened fire, their weapons spitting out rounds in rapid succession. The infected fell, but they kept coming. The roar of gunfire was deafening as the undead surged forward. Cole's hands shook, his grip slipping on his rifle, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let the infection take control now. Hendricks threw a grenade, and a loud explosion sent the infected scattering. The gap between them and the oncoming horde widened, but not for long. More were coming. "We've got to get to the roof," Briggs yelled. They pushed forward, climbing up a crumbling staircase into a nearby building. At the top, they found an old sniper nest, abandoned and covered in dust. Briggs and Hendricks set up on opposite sides, covering the street below. Cole staggered to the edge, his breath coming in gasps. The infection had nearly taken full hold. He could feel the cold creeping through him, the fever burning his skin. But there was no time to stop. The final battle was here. The Humvee was out of sight, out of options. They had only each other. And Cole, with every ounce of strength he had left, was determined to make sure the research made it to Echo. Even if it meant he never made it out. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and amber as the last remnants of humanity's hope clung to Outpost Echo. From the roof of the crumbling building, Cole could see the faint outline of the outpost in the distance, still standing, but barely. The infected were closing in, and time was running out. His hands were shaking now, the infection clawing at the edges of his mind, threatening to take control at any moment. His pulse throbbed in his temples, the fever spreading like wildfire, and the world around him was beginning to blur. But he wouldn't let go. "Cole!" Briggs shouted, snapping him from his daze. The lieutenant's eyes were filled with urgency, but there was something else there too. Recognition. Understanding. They both knew what was happening. "We have to move, now." Cole staggered to his feet, trying to ignore the dizziness that swirled in his head. He had to make it to Echo. He had to. If not for himself, then for what was left of the world. The research they carried was the key to stopping this nightmare. It had to be delivered. A fresh wave of infected flooded the street below. The horde was relentless. They were everywhere. More runners, more brutes, fast, furious, and relentless. They'd been moving like shadows in the night, and now they were upon them. Cole's rifle felt like a weight in his hands as he leveled it at the advancing swarm. He fired in quick bursts, the recoil making his arms tremble, but he didn't care. He couldn't care. Every bullet that took down one of the infected felt like a momentary victory, but for every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place. They were never going to stop. Briggs fired alongside him, but his shots were becoming erratic, his concentration breaking. The infection had taken hold of them both, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed them. But as long as they were breathing, they had to fight. "We need to go," Hendricks shouted from behind them. Cole glanced back at his team. Hendricks was already on the move, covering their retreat toward the rooftop exit. Briggs followed without hesitation, but Cole lingered, the weight of his decision hanging over him. The infected were closing in from all sides. He could feel them, their cold, dead eyes staring right through him, knowing that he wasn't like them. Not yet. "Cole!" Briggs' voice cut through the haze. "We move now, or we die here." The words felt like a punch to the gut. The infection, no, the hunger, gnawed at him, clouding his thoughts. For a moment, the temptation to give in was overwhelming. It would be so easy to drop the rifle, let the darkness take over, and become one with them. But then he saw it. The outpost in the distance. The last chance. Cole's eyes burned with clarity. No. He wasn't going to die here. He couldn't. With a final, desperate push, Cole staggered back to the others, his body screaming in protest. His legs felt like lead, his breath ragged. But he was still in control. Just barely. Let's move, Briggs shouted, leading the charge down the stairs. They fought their way through the streets, gunfire and screams filling the air. The infected were relentless, but they were out of time. And then, finally, they reached the gates of Echo. Cole collapsed as they broke through, the weight of the infection finally too much to bear. His body crumpled to the ground, his vision swimming. But he had made it. The research was safe. The world had one last chance. As the gates slammed shut behind them, Briggs knelt beside Cole. His face was grim, but there was something else there too, relief. You did it, Cole, Briggs said softly. Cole's lips twisted into a tired smile, blood staining his teeth. We did it. And then, with a final, shuddering breath, he let go. The infection had won. But the world, humanity, had one last chance to fight back. It was up to them now. And the legacy of the infected would live on in the hands of those who still had the will to fight.